You're listening to Transcaster Radio, a podcast about trans life and all that goes along with it. You can listen to the show anywhere you enjoy podcasts, and we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review. It helps us reach more people, and we greatly appreciate it. Now, here's your host, Caden Taylor.
Hey Transcasters, welcome to this week's episode of Transcaster Radio. I'm your host, Caden Taylor. We have an awesome guest for you this week, Trystan Angel Reese from Biff and I. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
I'm Trystan Reese. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm transgender, so I was assigned female at birth. As you could, I'd have like the quote unquote trans voice. It's such a sad stereotype, but we all sound the same. So yeah, and I'm Canadian born, but I was raised in a really small town in the middle of the Mojave Desert in California, next to an Air Force base. So that sucked. And yeah, I mean, I transitioned. I think I came out around maybe like 18, 19. And then I started transitioning a couple of years later. And then 10 years or so, oh my God, no, 15 years after I transitioned hormonally, I fell in love, and my partner and I adopted his sister's kids when they needed a place to live. So we became parents literally overnight. And then, 8 years after that, we decided to grow our family, and I gave birth to our son, Leo, myself. So I'm a trans dad. We have a family, 2 adopted kids that are related biologically to my partner, and then 1 kid who's related to both of us. And yeah, I'm a trans organizer. I have a nonprofit job where I help more queer and trans people build families. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. And that's the whole episode. Just kidding. The end.
So you guys became instant parents with your niece and nephew. How did you and Biff handle that?
Horribly. I mean,
I think I would have too.
Great. I mean, I think we as a couple handled it great, mostly because Biff, like I just ended up marrying and being partnered with like the most phenomenal person on the planet. And so that helps.
Yeah.
But, becoming parents overnight to 2 very traumatized children, and then having to fight a legal battle to protect to protect that sort of 4-person unit that we became, was the most difficult thing that I have ever been through. And I've been a pregnant man, and I've been a public pregnant man. That was as hard, having to figure out how to give them everything that they needed to like be safe and calm and to heal from what they had experienced. It was just extraordinarily difficult. Most people don't have to become a parent overnight with no preparation. So yeah, there's a reason for that. It's really difficult.
I can only imagine. How was the adoptive process?
I mean, it's interesting, and you may know a little bit about this just from your own family situation, but like there are so many different legal processes that are involved when it comes to becoming a parent to kids.
Yeah.
And so for us, it was just really convoluted and complicated. So we didn't go through a formal foster process to begin with. That would have taken a really long time, and it would have involved the kids actually going into foster care with some other strangers that we don't know who they are. And so ours was in informal placement to begin with. So his sister had the kids come and stay with us because she was in a really hard spot in her life. And so, she really said, can you take them for a little bit? And we were like, sure. And we had known that they were in a really hard spot. We didn't know how bad it had been until the kids came to stay with us and our eldest told us a little bit about what they'd been through. And so after they had been with us for, I think, 60 days or 90 days, we could file for emergency guardianship. And that was to give us like very basic legal protection. So if one of them got sick, we could take them to a doctor.
Yeah.
We could put them in daycare. You can't do anything if you're not a legal guardian. If we needed to travel anywhere and we were pulled over by the police for some reason, we have no legal connection to these kids, and so it was a really precarious and really unsafe situation for them to be in, to not be able to take medical action on their behalf is really, really hard. And so we filed for emergency guardianship, and that was granted. And then a few months later, we were granted permanent guardianship. But even permanent guardianship, it meant that if their birth parents were to be able to get things together in the tiniest way, at any point they could have gone to the courts and say, okay, we want our kids back now. And there would have been an investigation, but the court really, really values that, the sort of like that initial biological connection. Yeah. So, and if we had gotten one transphobic or homophobic judge, if we had gotten one transphobic or homophobic social worker or investigator or lawyer, they may have seen a house where there was rampant abuse and drug use and neglect with a heterosexual couple at the front of it. Yeah. They may have actually seen that as better than a safe, loving, supportive household where it was two gay men, one of whom is transgender, were at the heart of it. And so permanent guardianship we had for, I think, 5 years. But eventually we ended up crowdfunding the money that we needed to be able to do adoption, which really is the forever family situation that we felt like our kids really needed and deserved. And if I'm speaking selfishly, like, I think for my own mental health, not having that constant looming threat in the background of every parenting step, that at any point someone could come in and threaten our family, for myself and for the kids, that's really what we wanted. Yeah. And so finally, after 8 years of being their parents, first their uncles, then sort of like this weird nebulous uncle dad situation. That went through. So it was extraordinarily difficult, and we're really lucky it happened in LA County. And every investigator who came and looked at our family, interviewed the kids, interviewed their doctors, interviewed their teachers, interviewed my doctors, interviewed my partner's doctors, interviewed our bosses. I mean, it is a thorough process. They want to make sure that they want to make sure kids aren't being taken out of one unstable situation and put in another. And every single step of the way, every person, every judge, and I think we had 5 or 6 judges throughout the process, every single person that looked at us said, oh my God, this is an incredible family. These are people who are dedicated and loving and supportive and willing to do literally everything it takes to show up for these kids in the way they deserve. And all those same people looked at the situation they came from and said, oh my God, these kids cannot go back to that situation. So we were also really lucky in that we didn't face homophobia, transphobia along the way. Or if we did, we didn't see it. And we were able to overcome it by our sheer dedication to the children. So it was really, really difficult. And, we were really lucky in that we were in a good county and the laws were in our favor, and people were able to work through any of their homophobia to give our kids what they needed, which was a home where they were, we are like 100% not perfect parents, and holy shit, do we love those kids?
Of course. Yeah. Nobody's perfect.
No. You can't, that can never be the goal. Sometimes people I work with a lot of trans people who are pregnant or going through a pregnancy or parenting process. And they're like, oh my God, like, what if my kid hates me? And I'm like, oh, they definitely will. Like, you just have to make peace with that now. Like, there will be times in their life when they hate you. And so that should not be the goal, is for your kids to not hate you,
Yeah. I'm personally not a parent, but like we talked about previously, I spent most of them, at least from my age 10 on, with my grandparents. And I remember the struggle they went through to get guardianship. And during that time frame, I got sick, and taking me to the doctors was, my grandma and I talk about it every now and then today, about how hard that process was, because my parents didn't want to give me up either. Was another part of the problem. So
our kids' bio parents went through some stages like that, where especially when the welfare for the kids was cut and they took a hit financially, then they wanted to fight us. But then other times they appreciated not having kids, and so it was a similar thing where there was some back and forth.
Yeah. That definitely would be a struggle. And I know, going through that process isn't cheap. Yeah. No. Court costs, adopting cost, and that's not a cheap process.
Not at all.
Not taking care of children is not cheap.
That's true. For us, Yeah, it was really difficult because if we had applied to become foster parents and gone through that process, which would have taken many months, and the kids had been taken away from their home and put in foster care and then placed with us, it would have been free for us. So being a foster parent is free. The state covers all of your costs, and then you get a small stipend to offset some of those costs. But we just couldn't afford to have them languishing in the system for 6 months or whatever. Yeah. I have a foster sister, and I know there are so many foster parents who are hardworking and dedicated and great, but there are so many that are not.
Yeah.
And we were just too worried for that. So yeah, it cost us a lot of money. As for like raising the kids themselves, yes, it is expensive, but also like you don't have to buy the fanciest $500 stroller. Like you don't have to buy brand new clothes. We're connected to all these networks of other parents where like they hand down clothes to us and then we hand them on to the next parents. And now that I've developed a bit of a social media following, I also partner with, like really rad feminist, like gender inclusive kids clothing companies, and they gift us clothes. We educate our followers about them, and then we get free clothes, and then we pass those on to other trans families. So like we just try to work all of our resources in the ways that like working class and middle class parents have always worked their resources to like trade and barter. And so that's one of the things I try to tell trans and like other LGBTQ plus parents and prospective parents is like, you can also find a way to make it work. Like you go on Facebook and say like, we have a crib to give to someone. We need a pack and play. We have a pack and play to give to someone. We need a toddler bed, work your connections. And people showed up at our house. I think people were really moved by the story of like 2 20-something queer men like taking in these kids who needed a home, so like all of our friends sent us diapers and books and gave us parenting advice and, and all of those things. And so I think that part was not as hard as we thought it would have been. And then we did get to that place where we're like, oh my, holy shit, it's going to cost us $10,000 to do a final adoption.
Yeah.
And Biff was just like, we don't have that money. We can't do it. Like, we'll just have to live in this middle space forever. And he went to bed that night just really disappointed and upset. And I was just like, I'll be damned if money is going to get in the way of giving Haley and Riley what they need. And I just made a GoFundMe post and I told our story. And by the time we woke up the next morning, we had raised almost everything that we needed.
Wow. That's phenomenal.
Yeah. Queer people show up for each other. They really do. I mean, that's like one of the most powerful things about being queer is like, the systems don't exist for us. So like we make the systems, So yeah. And I at that time, I'd been doing work in the queer community for over 10 years. So I also had a really vast network of people who had seen me put my literal blood, sweat, and tears into the queer community, because I was an organizer traveling the country, helping trans people in small communities learn how to organize, learn how to tell their stories, learn how to fundraise. And so I think, I don't know, it was cool having all those people that I had done this work with and for show up and be like, well, now it's our turn to show up for you. It was really beautiful. It was really powerful. So,
yeah. So what made you decide to have little Leo, which is so cute?
Oh my God. I love him so much.
He's so cute.
I don't know. I mean, it's weird because I get asked that question so many times, like, why did you want to have a baby? And in some ways I'm like, I don't know. Why does anyone want to have a baby? It's weird to we have a bit of a double standard around sort of like asking queer people and trans people, like, why did you want to do this? But no one asked my straight sister, like, why did she want to have a baby? They just assume that like you meet someone, you fall in love, you feel that tug. Not everyone feels it, but a lot of people feel that tug, to want to create something tangible from this love that you have of another human being and to have that experience of creating life that, that like visceral human experience of creating something new where there wasn't something there before and having a little bit of yourself, even biologically, carry on after you're gone. And I feel like I've been able to sort of make, as much as any parent makes an impact on their kids, I've been able to make my sort of spiritual mark on Haley and Riley, I hope. And I was just curious. I was curious about what that would be like. And I don't know, I spent so much of my trans life, of my adult life, wishing I wasn't trans and trying desperately to not be trans and trying to pass and, work on my body and bulk up and, work on my voice. We made the joke about the voice, like, okay, how can I make my voice so I don't sound trans? You know what? I spent so much time on that and hating my body, and I'm gay. You know, I dated gay men. I've only ever dated, men, and trying to like reconcile all of that. I don't know. In a way, I was sort of like, what if I stopped? What if I stopped trying to be a cis dude? What if I just like said, fuck it, and was like, okay, I can't do that. Like, I will never be that. So what if I just embraced that part of me that's different and said, you know what? I don't want to be like you. What I can do that you can't is to make a fucking baby. Like, I can create life. Mm-hmm. And what if I just embraced that? And we wanted to grow our family. And the prospect of going through adoption again was so hard. And I don't want to discourage anyone, but ours was way harder than the average person. And we had done it, and it had gutted us both emotionally and financially. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds crazy, but like the easiest, fastest, cheapest way to grow our family and to grow it on our own terms and to not have to worry about judges and lawyers and investigators and social workers and attorneys. The fastest, easiest way really was to just like mix up my DNA with my partner's and then just like make a baby of our own.
Yeah.
And I had known, I know hundreds of transgender men all over the world who have done that. So I knew it was possible. And I went to a doctor to see like, what is the actual evidence? Because I'm a nerd. It's like, what does the actual data show us? And I dug deep into the academic literature, and I saw that like, oh my God, there's actually never been a study that shows that testosterone permanently impacts your fertility. Testosterone does not cause sterility.
How long had you been on testosterone by that point?
15 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, from age 20-ish to age 35.
Wow.
A long ass time is that. But, when you look at the research, there's a study on trans pregnancy and 40% of the people in that study had been on testosterone for more than 10 years. And they had gone off of it. They had ovulated just fine. And within 3 to 6 months, their cycle had come back. And within 3 to 6 months, they were pregnant. And they had given birth to babies, and their rates of conception, like their chances of getting pregnant every month, the length of time it took them to get pregnant, mm-hmm. and like every other marker in their pregnancy were the exact same as the average, the average pregnancy in America that year. So no increased rates of any complication, hardship, nothing. So everything is basically the same. Our uteruses are amazing, and you can hit them with testosterone for a long time and then stop taking testosterone, and they wake up and they're like ready to kick out some healthy eggs. No, unless you have any other complication. We're just as likely to have fibroids or PCOS. There's actually a slight increased chance of PCOS if you're trans. We're not sure why, but you're just as likely to have gestational diabetes, anything else as anyone else. So it's not like guaranteed you'll have a baby, but there doesn't seem to be any increased complications if you've been on testosterone based on what we know. And the studies are not huge, but based on every study we have, and there have been many studies on various aspects of trans fertility, it's so wild and not what I was told at all when I started transitioning.
I was going to say that's such a misconception, I think, in the trans community that you can't get pregnant once you're on testosterone for long periods of time. So, mm-hmm. Because they tell you that you should get a hysterectomy after being on testosterone for 5 years.
Total lies. Not evidence-based at all.
Yeah. And that's what I thought. Now, I personally didn't want to have children of my own. And I probably, even if I did, I probably wouldn't have been able to get pregnant because I had a lot of other issues like fibroids. I had endometriosis. I had tons of stuff that I had been dealing with since I was 16. So I ended up getting a hysterectomy, but I had it in 2 different parts because I had actually had first half of the hysterectomy done prior to me actually transitioning at all. So I do follow a Facebook group that is for trans men who are pregnant, and I try to get that across to people that you can get pregnant just because you've been on testosterone for several years or a decade doesn't mean that you still can't come off of it and get pregnant. And I hate that misconception because I think probably more than 50% of the trans community believes that. I don't know that for a fact, but I do think that a lot of trans men believe that they can get pregnant if they go on testosterone. And it actually keeps people from starting medical transition, because they want to have children at some point in their life, but may not be ready. They're going through other things. And so it hinders them, I think, in a lot of ways.
I mean, I hear from a lot of people who say, like, I postponed transition to get pregnant, which is fine. Like, it is hard to get pregnant and have a baby post-transition. Like, it's hard to stop taking your testosterone when you've been on it for a long time. It's hard to navigate the world as a pregnant man. That is like a perfectly legitimate choice to make if someone want to choose it. And I want it to be an informed choice. I want them to know, like, oh, I actually can later on stop taking testosterone, regain an ovulatory cycle, and either go through an egg retrieval process. So, if you can stop your testosterone, you can ovulate again, get a menstrual cycle, and you can go through a medical process where they can, basically trick your body into maturing a bunch of eggs at once. They can go in and take those eggs out, and then your partner could carry. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or a surrogate or your sister. Like, you can have a genetic link to your child, whatever, or you could get pregnant and have your own baby. Totally. I just want people to know that is possible. And if they don't want to do that, that's fine. But yeah, there's so much misconception. I mean, my doctor, when I started transitioning, my endocrinologist, was like, yeah, this will render your uterus an uninhabitable environment. Those are the words he used. And now it's like 16 years ago. And I 100% still remember that.
Wow. Uninhabitable.
Yeah, it was so stark. It was like the Gobi Desert in my body or something. Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah. I mean, I think the second thing is, to use medical terminology, testosterone is a dose-dependent ovulation suppressant. So that's like fancy words for if you're taking it the way you're supposed to, and it's being managed well by your medical team, it should stop ovulation. But it doesn't in all cases. Like, bodies are unique, beautiful creations, and everybody is different. And not in all cases does testosterone stop ovulation. And so, especially when you first start taking it, especially if you miss a shot, like, who hasn't missed a shot?
Yeah, I have for the last 2 weeks.
Hello. I did yesterday. Like, I was like, oh my God, my shot was supposed to be Friday. Like,
yeah, mine's on Friday. And then I'm like, oh crap, I need to take it now.
Yeah. And so we miss shots. And so if we have, if we are, having the type of intercourse that could result in a pregnancy, like, absolutely an unintended pregnancy can happen, and so I think there's a couple of things, that are sort of in that realm is like, largely speaking, yeah, testosterone is birth control because it does stop you from ovulating. Except when it doesn't, and so it's really on us to be super informed about our bodies, to know that unfortunately, even the most well-intended provider doesn't necessarily have all the information and isn't necessarily up to date on all the information. And so in some ways, I really encourage people to arm themselves with evidence-based information, not what like someone said, their nurse said in a comment thread. Like, that's not science, like, we really have to go back and geek out on like, what does the actual evidence say, and really push our providers to learn more. Like, is this what you're supposed to be telling me? Is this like up to date on the WPATH standards of care? Yeah. And a lot of people just, they're really not. And even that is flawed in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's why like a huge part of the work I do is dedicated to digging into that data and then sharing it with trans people in a way that is super user friendly. It is like easy to understand, and in a way that they can then take back to their parents. If they're a youth, their parents will maybe telling them, well, then you can never have a baby and I'll never have grandbabies. That's not true. Yeah. I mean, number one, I could adopt, and PS, an adopted kid is just as much a fucking grandkid as any kid I give birth to.
I agree.
And two, like, that's just not true. Like, I absolutely could have kids, and I can go through fertility preservation, and I could have kids later on. There's so many amazing options now. I just want people to know about them.
Yeah. I think that's part of the problem, is that people don't know other options, and getting that information out there is critical.
It's hard not to feel paranoid.
Yeah.
It's hard not to feel like, oh, this information doesn't exist, because people don't think we should be parents.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's really hard.
Good point.
It's hard. I mean, there have been almost no almost no studies on transgender women and fertility. And I'm like, we've been giving transgender women HRT for decades.
Yeah.
And no one has ever looked at whether or how they could regain their fertility after taking estrogen, androgen blockers, blah, blah, blah. And it's really hard not to go to that paranoid place and be like, oh, no one's ever studied it because they don't think that it should happen. Mm-hmm. And that's a dark way of looking at it. But like, why else wouldn't they have bothered? Why wouldn't have researchers been like, oh, we're giving this substance to this huge swath of our community? Why aren't we studying how it's going to impact their ability to become a parent one day? It's gross. It's gross.
It is.
So, yeah.
How did you handle being off testosterone?
It sucked. It was hard. It was hard.
Especially being on it for so long.
So long. And then you forget how big a role it plays in your life. You're like, I just do my shot every 2 weeks. Not a big deal. Yeah, it was hard. It was hard in different ways than I expected. So like, it was not physically difficult at all.
Mm-hmm.
At all. It was just like, I stopped taking it. And then, my cycle came back, and I don't know, that was not as difficult for me as I thought it was going to be. It was like, I had cramps. I took medicine, I took like Tylenol or whatever. It was fine. And I really worked to be informed about my cycle, to track like, okay, this is where I am in the cycle. These are the things I'm going to start to expect mood-wise. These are the things that I need to be doing in terms of self-care to help me get all of that in order, to help regulate all of that. So physically it wasn't hard, and my voice didn't change, and my beard didn't fall out. And, I guess my body changed a little bit, but really not too much. I just got a little softer in places. It wasn't too bad. It was really the mood shit. Yeah. It was like, oh my God.
You don't realize it.
You really do not realize it. Like, hormones play such a huge role in who we are as people and how we think about things and how we approach other people. It's like this delicate web, the whole endocrine system. It's really a delicate web. And when you pull on one strand, it sort of like is all connected. So I really found that I was much more short-tempered. I had a much harder time regulating my emotions. It was really embarrassing because I'm a grown-ass man. And I should have like the self-awareness to know like this is a hormonal shift that's happening. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard when you're a parent. It's really hard when you're a partner. I think if I was just like on my own, I would have the time to like have a bath and like journal and like meditate and try to piece out like what of my experience in this moment is hormonal, what of it is real, what of it is tapping into larger sort of traumas that I've experienced. I just don't have the time for that self-awareness.
Not luckily, dad of 3 and partner and no.
No, I was just like in the moment all the time. Luckily, once I got pregnant, I qualified for mental health services through my provider. And so I was able to see a therapist at least once a week, sometimes more than once a week when things got really hard. And she was really incredible. But yeah, that was the hardest part, was the mood stuff. And I really had to sit down with my partner and my kids many times to say, I'm so sorry. I know I snapped at you all earlier. Here's what's happening in my body. It's still my responsibility. Like, I still own my response and the way I'm dealing with it. And I'm sorry that I snapped or, whatever. Yeah, I had to say sorry a lot.
Yeah, I bet.
That part was hardest.
Did you start testosterone right after you had the baby?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's no evidence that tells us concretely when can you start testosterone after you give birth. But there are a few factors that come into play. One of the biggest factors is around whether or not the person who gave birth plans to lactate. So the way that our bodies work postpartum is that basically we are flooded with a rush of estrogen postpartum. And that helps heal our wet tissues. One of the primary drivers of the healing of wet tissue in the body is estrogen. And so that's one of the reasons why our brains produce a ton of estrogen, or like our brains don't produce it, but our brain sends a signal to our endocrine system and our ovaries to produce a shitload of estrogen to heal our bodies from childbirth. But also to like send the signal to start to lactate, to produce the milk to feed our babies. And so you really cannot start testosterone right after giving birth if you plan to lactate, because it'll dry up your supply. And so some people have to postpone for that reason. And then other people have to postpone because if they've had any kind of sort of like tearing or other trauma during the childbirth, your body needs that estrogen to heal that all up. And so, generally speaking, we say, and this is like not evidence-based, this is just based on what we know, if you don't plan to lactate, you can go back on testosterone right away if you want. You can also postpone and wait to be a little more healed. That's what I did. I did not plan to lactate and feed my baby using my body, but I did want to heal up from the actual childbirth. So I postponed. I was going to start like 4 weeks or 6 weeks, but I just wasn't healing the way that I wanted. I wanted to give my body more time on its own to heal. So I think like 2 months afterward, I went back on testosterone. And that really helped to regulate all the insane things that happen hormonally postpartum.
Yeah. Since you didn't start, did you struggle with postpartum depression?
I didn't. I had the opposite. I had postpartum elation. I felt like immediately connected to my baby. I just wanted to be around him all the time. And I'm just so lucky I did not have postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression. What they call it now is perinatal mood disorders. That's the sort of like umbrella term for all the emotional things that can happen afterwards. Some people do experience extreme postpartum psychosis. And, so that sort of is an umbrella term. That's all of those things. And there's no data on trans and non-binary people and perinatal mood disorders. So I just can't tell you, are we more or less prone, and does testosterone help that or not? We just have no idea. And I have anecdotal evidence based on stories that people have told me, but a few dozen stories does not evidence make. Yeah. So I just, we just don't know. Yeah. But we do know that if you have a birth by cesarean, it may be helpful to go on testosterone right away, because testosterone does promote the production of red blood cells in our body, and that can actually help heal a surgical wound. So some people say if you had a birth by cesarean, go back on testosterone right away if you're not planning to lactate. And that may help heal the wound and get you back on your feet and living your life and parenting a little faster. But so much of this, we just don't know. But for me, I waited a couple months so that I could heal and everything. And I did not plan to lactate, so I didn't have to worry about that.
Which totally makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
How was the pregnancy for you, like overall? Was it a good pregnancy? Was it a rough pregnancy? Did you have a lot of morning sickness? Things like that.
Yeah, it's funny, like working with my medical team, I told them like my plan is to be the most boring pregnancy they've ever supported. And of course they thought that was funny because I'm a man and I'm the first man they've ever worked with. But that really was my goal. Like I just did everything they told me to do. I really dug into the evidence, and I was like, what do we know about pregnancy and bodies and developing fetuses? Like, what do we know that can support that and make that as easy as possible? And I'm just really lucky I happened to win the genetic lottery in terms of my pregnancy. I just had a pretty straightforward, easy pregnancy with no complications. I mean, I had morning sickness. I felt nauseous in the first trimester. Did you know we have no idea why that happens?
I was just actually going to ask you that question because like I said, I've never been pregnant. So
yeah, it's fascinating. We do not know. We think maybe that the body is just super sensitive to not taking things in that might harm the fetus, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense. You know what I mean? Then why would we be throwing up for no reason?
Yeah.
We just have no idea. It's just so interesting. But yeah, no, I had morning sickness, but nothing too bad. And I had weird cravings. But what I did was I tried to listen to the craving and interpret it as my body telling me what it needed.
Yeah.
Also, I was really, really craving salty things. And I was like, oh, I need more sodium. So I tried to find healthy ways to get sodium. I was like, well, I can,
instead of drinking it. Instead of just intaking a bunch of salt at one time.
For me, I wanted to eat French fries. I wanted to eat French fries with 4 packets of salt on it. That's not good for your body.
Yeah, no, not at all.
When you're pregnant, which is fine. You can absolutely do whatever you want. But for me, I was like, okay, how can I meet this need, but also not be super unhealthy? Yeah, so that was fine. I actually really loved the second trimester. Some people joke about a second trimester glow. your body really starts like producing a bunch of happy chemicals at that time. In most cases, not every case, but really like I started putting on a healthy amount of weight, and I've always been super skinny. And so like, I don't know, watching my face round out a little bit, I had a butt for the first time. I don't know, it was super cool. And then also like, oh my God, look what my body's doing. Like it's doing all this stuff to like help me sustain and grow a human. I don't know. Like, I just thought it was so cool and weird. So yeah. And I watched a bunch of documentaries about like like human development and fetal development. And my kids, at that point were like 7 and 9 and then 8 and 10. They thought it was awesome. They wanted to like watch this documentary. And then like, when the kick started and the hiccup started, they wanted to like feel it. I don't know. It was a really cool, like nerdy experience that I went through. And that's around the time when our story went public in a way that I did not imagine it was going to.
Yeah.
And so that was really hard and weird. Yeah. And so like it was a big tabloid explosion that we did not expect, the Daily Mail, blah, blah, blah. That was really hard. I had like a lot of really, really bad days of just being reminded in a very visceral way of how much transphobia exists in the world. And I think for me, it was a really important wake-up call. As a white transgender man living in Portland, Oregon, I think that I was personally removed from the worst of transphobia. I knew it existed in my head, and like, I feel and have always felt 100% committed to standing up for and with and supporting the leadership of transgender women, especially transgender women of color. Like that has always felt intellectually so important for me.
Me too.
In my anti-racism work, in my allyship work. And it wasn't until I became the target of the most brutal transphobia on the internet that I understood in my body what it is like to be the target of the most vicious, brutal, violent transphobia that exists in the world and on the internet. And it wasn't until then that I was like, oh shit, like people hate us.
And how did you handle that?
Oh my God. I mean, it was really, really hard. I mean, luckily I had an incredible badass therapist in Portland. Like she used to be a sexologist. Like it was like super trans competent and friendly. Like it was just like sheer incredible universe looking out for me, or luck that's who happened to work at the Kaiser OB clinic. It's just like so random. But like I just showed up and she immediately was like, how's your pregnancy going? Are you experiencing any dysphoria? She used all these code words that said to me she knew what the fuck was going on. She's like, a lot of a lot of pregnant people go through that. A lot of non-gestational partners go through that. Like she didn't have to switch her language. She never once said pregnant women. She never once said mommies and mamas or none of that. She was just badass. So she helped me a lot. My partner helped me a little. He was raised in a Pentecostal household. Oh. So like he already knew what was out there. And he didn't know how naive I was, and I think it was a little bit hard for him to see me have this awakening. I think it was hard for him to realize how much privilege I've had in my life. My parents had their own journey around me being trans, but they were never hateful. They were never malicious. They never kicked me out of their house. Their thing was always like, we don't get this and we're worried for you, but we love you. Yeah. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. And he didn't really get that in his home.
Yeah.
His mom is fine, but like she really struggled. And his community really struggled, and so I think he had already built up his resilience. And I think it was hard for him to see me having this awakening of like, oh my God, transphobia and homophobia is real. That's not really what it was. But I think in some way, he was like, what did you think was going to happen when we told our story? Like, this is what we signed up for. And I was like, I didn't know. But
still, I mean, the first time you experience it, that's a huge awakening. I mean, I personally live in a conservative area in Florida, and I have gotten that hate from the time I came out and started to transition. But it's still, when it's right there in your face for the very first time, that's extremely, extremely hard to handle. And he probably felt that at some point in his life.
Oh, and in little ways along the way, but he felt it in little ways and then built up resilience, and then in little ways and then built up resilience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So by the time this happened, he was like, yeah, fuck him.
Yeah.
Who cares? Who cares what anybody thinks about us? But I was like, oh my God, everyone hates us. I just didn't have that strength in that way. But I'm really lucky at some point, I just a few things happened. Like he and I made a pact where like every morning I would go off to work and he was like, do not go on the internet. Like, do not go on social media. Do not read comments. Like, do you promise me? And I'd be like, yes. And so like he helped with that. And then also like we hit a point where I just posted on Facebook and I said, I need help. Like I can't, at that point we were getting like hundreds of messages a day on Facebook, and like 80% of them were like super supportive. This is awesome. You guys are amazing. 10% was like trans people needing help, asking questions. They're parents of trans youth being like, I didn't know this was possible. Things that like we needed to respond to and help people with. And then 10% like vicious, malicious, hateful, disgusting messages and comments. You know what I mean? And so I just posted and I said, oh, we need help. Like I need someone to say, thank you so much for your support. Follow us on Facebook. To the 80% of supportive people, I needed the 10% to be given my email address so I could send them resources, data, support them. And then I needed someone to just like delete, block, report that other 10%. I could not do it on my own anymore. It was too hard. And I needed to reach those 10% of people who needed help. And so I just posted and I was like, you know what? We need someone to manage our social media. We cannot do it. I'm trying to grow a human. Biff is trying to raise our other humans. And all of the straight allies in my life just like showed the fuck up.
Yeah.
And actually it was a queer man of color who's a friend of mine, Mario. And he was like, I'll do this. I'll create a calendar. I'll give people shifts. And then my friends would just like sign up with him, and in shifts, 24 hours a day from around the world, our friends were monitoring our social media.
That's awesome.
Then other friends of mine would be like, what else can I do? And I'd be like, don't argue with people in comments threads. Like that is a waste of your time, but look for people who are genuinely curious and want to know more and educate. So if someone is like, that's gross, report that comment. Do not fight with that person. But if someone is like, I don't get it. Like I thought transgender men like wanted to be men and wouldn't want to do something that like mostly women do. Like, how does this all work? Okay, that's a person that you can educate. Go in there and explain it. Like, talk a little bit about like, yeah, dude, most trans men don't want to have babies. Of course not. But some really want to have kids, and this is one way they can do it, and they're willing to go through it. Or whatever. Just educate them. So. Luckily, I have enough people in my life who are like, tell me what to do. And I just was like, can you handle this? Can you go get your people, go get your cousins, in the like straight people, cisgender people way, go manage this. And so that's a big way of how I was able to manage it, was I just asked for help.
Yeah. It's okay. Sometimes we need help. Even when we don't want to, even when we don't want to ask for it. So the kids reacted well to the pregnancy.
Yeah. We had already been telling them, we had already said like, we really want to have a baby. And, we think we're going to have a baby by, daddy carrying the baby, and they already knew a little bit about like sperm, egg. They were little though, so they didn't understand much else other than that. But we just said, we're going to use, daddy's egg and daddy's sperm, and then we'll have a baby that's, made up of both of us, and you'll have a little sibling. And, my daughter had a really hard time because she was like, you already have a baby and it's me.
Oh.
So she had her own like totally regular thing of like, the littlest kid being like, I don't want to be the middle kid. I like being the baby. And our son was a little bit like, what are my friends going to think? Are people going to know about this? And so we really tried to work with him on like, okay, well, you're not in charge of our bodies, and we're not asking for your permission to have a baby, but we really want to make sure we're being respectful of your part of this story. So knowing that you can't tell us not to do this, but we want to be respectful of your request, like, how can we meet in the middle? Like, what would you feel comfortable with? And so he said like, okay, when daddy is really pregnant and showing, like, I don't want him to pick me up from school, because I just don't want people to stare at me. I don't want it to be a big deal. And we said, no problem, that's fine. And so like we try to really be respectful of the way that he wanted his part of the story told. And a little bit of that was fake, because by the time our story went public, everyone in Portland knew.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what percentage, but I bet at least 60% in our neighborhood, probably like 90%. We were on the news.
Yeah.
You know, like everyone knew, but you know what? It made him feel better to not feel like people were staring. And so fine, like no problem. Like whatever we can do to help him feel empowered, to help him feel like we were respecting him, that's easy for us to do. So yeah, it's just been one of those things where we navigate it. And then once the baby was born, you know, my daughter has just been like totally obsessed with him, and she's been obsessed with him ever since. And they play together all the time. And, you know, there's such a sweetness there. And, you know, my son is sort of like, call me when he can play soccer. He's a little less engaged, but that makes sense developmentally for his age, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Did you get a piece of advice from anybody that stood out to you as far as parenting goes?
I mean, that's complicated because every kid is different. Every parent is different. The way that I parent every one of our kids is completely different from how I parent the other. But honestly, when the big kids came to stay with us when they were little, they were 1 and 3, what I really tried to do is I looked around at the people in my life who had the relationships with their kids that I wanted. And then I basically asked if they would be my parenting mentor. You know what I mean? Like I looked at, I have some really rad teenagers in my life, you know? So I would like ask their parents, like, can I take you to coffee? Because I want to know, like, what did you do to have a 17-year-old who's like grounded, worldly, smart, compassionate, connected to you, connected to other people? I would just take other parents out for coffee and be like, what did you do? How did you do that? You know, so I solicited advice from the people who were like doing it the way I wanted to do it. And we had these 2 like middle-aged lesbian women that were like in my life from before, who had just like the coolest conversations with their kids that I got to watch, just like really connected to them. And so we would just go to them and be like, yeah, what did you do? How did you do it? Yeah. You know? And one of the earliest pieces of advice that I ever got that I still live by today is they just said, like, your relationship as a couple matters more than anything else. Because if you're not good, your family's not good. You are the rock, you are the foundation, your connection, your respect for each other, your love for each other, your adoration of each other, your appreciation for each other, that matters more than literally everything else. So that comes before everything. And that, you know, I got that advice 8 years ago. And every single day I remember that. And if you ask the kids, who does daddy love most? They will say Dada.
Oh,
I love Biff the most. He came before them. Yeah. He will be there after them. And he is my number 1. They're all number 2, and they're number 2 equally to each other. And they know after Dada comes them.
Yeah.
But he is the most important thing in my life. And us being connected is my job. Like, it's his job. He stays home. It's his job to like manage our house and to do all of that labor. And it's my job to make sure that our relationship is stable and steady. So like, I make sure we do date night. I make sure we have sex. I make sure that he is getting everything he needs to be a great stay-at-home parent. And if sometimes that means that I do the laundry, I do the dishes, I clean the house because he's too tired, fine. Like, that's my job too. You know what I mean? Yeah. Even though it's his quote unquote job as a stay-at-home parent to manage our house, that's fine. But it's my job to make sure that he's sane and supported and feels loved and appreciated.
Yeah.
And so, you know, they said that, and we do date nights. Like we go out together. We have sex. The kids don't sleep in our bed because this is our space.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I make sure
very important.
Yeah, it really is. And I see a lot of parents really lose themselves in parenting and lose their connection to each other. And, you know, not every relationship is supposed to last forever, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. But for me, I'm like, you know, Biff is the best person I have ever known. And I never want that to slip away, you know? And so I just really work intentionally for us to stay connected, and I think everything good stems from that. Because if we have a struggle, if the kid is having a hard time, we're a team, you know? And so I think that really, really helps.
Did you struggle at all during your pregnancy with your identity as a man?
Not at all. No. I mean, because I know hundreds, literally hundreds of trans men who've gone through this process. And I've had, I guess, 10 very close friends over the last 20 years get pregnant and have birth who are men. And so that connection between pregnancy and femininity, that was broken a long time ago for me.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, yeah, dude, 99.99% of people who get pregnant are women. Totally. Absolutely. That's just reality. That's just truth.
Mm-hmm.
But like some like super special badass men can also do that. So I didn't have any, I was just, yeah, it was nothing. I'm like, Matt has done this. Steven has done this. Liam has done this. I just have so many cool friends of mine who are dudes who've been through this. And the data shows us that about a third of, trans gestational parents experience heightened dysphoria. So pregnancy is extremely psychologically difficult for them. What they feel is the feminizing of their body. Like that is excruciatingly difficult. That is very hard and they need a lot of support. About a third are more like me, where they're just like, man, like this is just a thing that my body is doing, and it stays the same. And about a third actually find that their dysphoria lessens through pregnancy. I know, it's crazy.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that.
Yeah, but what they say, and there are several studies on this, and what they say is basically like, look, I've always had dysphoria about my body, my chest, having a uterus, my like nether regions. I've always had a hard time with that. But like now all those parts are being used for something cool, which is to like create a human. Mm-hmm. And so the practicality of being able to use it for something good, actually a third of trans gestational parents report that actually makes it way better. It's like, cool. Well, at least these boobs are being used for something. You know what I mean? They've had dysphoria around their chest, but now their chest is being used to like nourish a human. And then that like can totally reorient their relationship to their bodies. About a third, not everyone, 1 in 3. And so it's just interesting that, I'm sort of in that middle path, and the data shows us that there's a huge variety of experiences, every single one of which is right. Every one of which is normal, every one of which is natural. And so when I work with trans pregnant people, I try to encourage them, if they don't feel more dysphoric, like that's fine. If they feel more dysphoric, that's fine too. There's no wrong way to do this. There's no wrong way to be trans. And by extension, there's no wrong way to be a trans parent or a trans pregnant person or whatever. All of it is natural. All of it is normal. All of it is good. And all of it is different, and all of it requires different types of support. So, yeah.
Do you have any advice to trans people that want to start a family of their own?
Oh my God.
I know you probably have a ton.
I know, it's like so big. Yeah. And it depends on where they are in their process. I think it's the same thing, because I work with so many queer people who want to form families. And I think I give the same advice to all of them, which is like, hold tight to your goal of having a family, but hold light to how you get there.
Oh, I like that.
There are so many variables in terms of paths to parenthood, and you might have a dream that your partner can get pregnant, but it turns out, she doesn't have viable eggs and you have to use your eggs, or you have to get pregnant, or she doesn't want to, or your partner's a transgender woman who can't, or you're partnered with a cisgender man, and you try to get pregnant and it doesn't work. You experience infertility. It's too expensive to buy sperm and you don't want to use a known donor. There are barriers in place, which then means that like you're going to foster or adopt or both, and like, I promise that like when you become a parent, however it happens, you will never regret the way that you became a parent, because however a kid shows up in your life, it will be the exact right kid for you, period.
That's a good point.
If
I like that.
If you were hoping to foster but didn't qualify, so you ended up having a biological kid, once your bio kid is born, you will not for a second be like, oh, I guess I just wish I adopted instead. No. Nope. You will be like, thank God you're here.
Yeah.
And if you foster, that kid shows up and you're like, thank God you're here. Like, this is my kid. You are going to teach me so much, and I am going to teach you so much. You will never have a regret about how you became a parent. What we see from the data is that a lot of trans people regret never becoming a parent. And I think just people didn't imagine that they ever could or would,
Yeah.
But I just say, like, don't hold too tightly to how you think you're going to get there. Be really open to what the path has to teach you and where it takes you. And somewhere out there, like a kid or kids is waiting for you, whether they know it or not. Some part of them is waiting for you. And when they show up, and sometimes it literally means like half raising a neighbor's kid because their neighbor can't show up for them in the way that they need. Sometimes it means mentoring. Sometimes, there are so many ways that we get to be there for kids who need us. And it isn't always in a parent role. But if you want to be a parent, it'll happen. It'll happen. Like, keep pushing for it. But, try to feel open to being flexible about how it shakes out, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just too many variables. And you're in Florida. There's some places where like we just never will qualify for adoption. Okay, we'll do it a different way.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Especially depending on where you are.
Yep.
Yeah. How do you think your work helps the trans and LGBTQ community?
I mean, in my formal work, I'm the director of family formation at Family Equality. Like, it's literally my job to help more queer people become parents. It's my job to identify and eliminate barriers to family building. That's like my job description. So, I travel the country and I host panels and other educational events and workshops for people who want to become parents. I build online resources. I've built an online ecosystem for providers so that they can better serve and support our families, our community when they show up. And then right now I'm working on a partnership with Fertility IQ, which will be a video series with corresponding resource library on trans fertility for the trans community, both
that's awesome.
Trans masculine and trans feminine. So you'll be able to watch videos of trans people who've been through different kinds of fertility processes. You'll be able to watch interviews with doctors so they can who know about this, so they can actually tell you. And I think probably most importantly, I've created a whole chapter on resiliency and self-advocacy strategies. So like when a doctor says something transphobic, what do you do? What do you say? How do you have that conversation with a doctor given the power dynamic that's in place? When you meet a provider who's really great, how do you deploy them to be your ally and work with other people who are messed up? That's a huge part of what I think we're lacking.
Yeah, I agree.
We have some resources that exist for us in medical spaces. I've never seen a resource that's teaching a trans person how to stand up for themselves in a medical situation.
I have not either.
No. Or how to take care of ourselves afterwards. Like all of that resiliency stuff. How do we build up our strength to go back and do it again after we've experienced something that taps into our sort of like larger underlying trauma? So yeah, so I'm doing a bunch of stuff. And then like I'm on Instagram all the time, just like posting about being a parent and being trans and blah, 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 whatever. Most of my followers are not trans. About 86% of my followers are women.
Oh, interesting.
Cisgender straight women, which is fascinating. So
that is.
A lot of my work really is on educating other folks to be better with us.
Yeah.
Most trans influencers, like in the social media space, like, are there like 4 trans people? I'm just not. That's just not sort of like who's most attracted to my story, which is fine. Someone's got to deal with the cis.
That's true. That's very true.
And I think as someone who has had so much privilege in my life, I live in Portland, I'm white, I'm like cis passing when I'm not pregnant.
Yeah.
I have so many privileges. I feel like it is really my responsibility to deal with cisgender people, to educate them, to meet them where they are, to bring them along so that other people don't have to do that incredibly emotionally taxing work. I feel like it's my responsibility. So
yeah. Well, you do a good job.
I do my best, and I am always learning, and I'm always getting feedback. Trans people will always just tell me like, I don't like the way you worded this. You should have said this differently, whatever. And I'm like, great, thank you so much. Like, I will definitely do that next time. Let me go back and fix that. Like, I love hearing how I can be better, because otherwise how am I going to learn and grow? And I'm 36. I'm like basically a trans elder at this point. Yeah. And so like, I really see my relationship with, people, trans folks who are younger as being symbiotic. Like I want to teach them what I have learned. And I want them to teach me what they're learning. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming on today with me and talking to me.
Yeah, I'm like totally happy to do it anytime. Like, yeah, I don't get to talk with other trans people enough about this. So much of my work is focused on, the cis. So this is cool. Yeah.
All right, Transcasters, that's all we have for you this week. Thank you for listening, as always, to this week's episode of Transcaster Radio. Don't forget to tune in next week for another great episode. Until next time, love life, live authentically, and as always, rise up.